It lasted for 21 months, and I measured how many died and how fast they grew. And an important part of my design was I picked habitat specialists that only lived in either red clay or in white sand. And then I picked their closest relative, well, not their closest relative, but a close relative that lived in the other one. So for this family here in the this genus Parkia in the Fabaceae, I had this species named Multihuga that only found in clay soils, and Ignifolia that was only found in white sand soils. And so I had one representative of each of those habitat specialists planted in both environments. And well, this group, Proteum Berkeley, I'll tell you about in more detail later. I had 10 species, but this ended up being important because I could generalize afterwards and say, well, you know, white sand species do this and clay soil species do this, but what if they were all in one family? That would have not been very generalizable. I could have only generalized to one family. So this is what we call phylogenetic control, and it ended up being a really interesting part of my project. So this is just a photo to show you an orthopteran, a katydid. You can see it wants to get in and eat all the plants, but it can't because they got this nylon netting. So the nylon netting was pretty effective, and I was able to exclude herbivores to a reasonable degree from my experiment. And what I found was that the species could survive just fine in the wrong soil type. You know, what happened was the clay species, they grew way faster than the white sand species. So they invested in growth and not so much in defense. And so when you had herbivores not present, the clay species, they grew faster than the white sand species did, even in their home soil type. But when you had the herbivores present, they ate all the clay species. They preferentially attacked them. And so that allowed white sand species specialists to dominate in white sand forests. And in clay forests, the clay species just grew faster than the white sand specialists. The insects, you know, they attacked both plants, but the clay guys could outpace the attack, and they could grow fast and survive. And this means, you know, with herbivores, you've got clay specialists are dominating in clay forests, and white sand specialists are dominating in white sand forests. When you take herbivores away, clay specialists did better in both environments. What I also did was measure some of the defensive traits, some of the chemicals in the leaves and the leaf toughness, and I found that also in support of this hypothesis, the white sand specialists had a higher investment in chemical defense and in physical defenses compared to their clay soil relatives. Here's just some mug shots. These are clay soil specialists growing in white sand. You can see that they look perfectly happy, they're growing fine. And this is when, also in white sand, but when they're not protected by herbivores. And they got riddled with bullet holes. And many of them died. Not really bullet holes, right? They were eaten by insects. Okay. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I wanted to continue studying this, but kind of in a deeper time scale. And so I started really focusing on this group, Proteum, in the Berkeley. So it's the frankincense and myrrh family. Everyone's probably heard of frankincense and myrrh. And these guys produce these really fragrant resins. Anyone ever been to like a church or a synagogue, you've smelled that scent. That comes from this family. These guys only live in the tropics. And this particular group is really common and diverse in the Amazon and in the Neotropics. And they have these bird and monkey dispersed fruits, these really beautiful compound leaves packed with toxins. And I picked this group because, as I said, they're common. You can find them everywhere. There are a lot of species in the Amazon, because remember, I'm interested in species diversity in the Amazon. And you can find them on white sand forests. You can find them in clay forests. There's another kind of forest that's intermediate called terrace or brown sand. You can find them in flooded soil forests and swamp forests. You can find them in lots of different environments. And so I was curious to know whether, if you've made a molecular phylogeny of this group, to figure out how they're all related to one another, to what extent do habitat specialists, are they close relatives or are they distant relatives? You know, you can imagine, what if like all of the white sand specialists were all each other's closest relatives? Let's say they were all this group right here. Well, your conclusion would then be that something happened and they shifted over to adapt to white sand soils, but that wouldn't explain how the speciation events since then, right? Because they would have evolved it once and then they would have speciated. Or if you find different colors all over the map, every branch is a different color, you might conclude that these habitat switches are really important in the diversity of the group. That you're always switching habitats, and that's what's driving speciation in the group. So that was my thought. And so these are all the species of proteum that live in the western Amazon, and red is red clay, and green for some reason is white sand, and blue is brown sand. And actually, most of these species, like 3/4 of them, you really only find them in one of those 3 soil types, and you never find them on the other ones. And the ones that are associated with white sand and green, you can see there's 5 of them, and they come out in 5 different places in the phylogeny. So that I thought was interesting, that kind of warranted further study. And so I started wondering, how is this happening? How are these habitat specialization evolving? And I had some good evidence that herbivores were involved, but I started thinking about it in more detail. How could herbivores influence speciation? And one way is the way that I already mentioned to you, is that they're magnifying that trade-off between investing in growth and investing in defense. But that's a real generalist kind of thing. That doesn't even take into account all the diversity of herbivore attack, right? Because there's another way that herbivores could influence specialization, and that's if different herbivores are attacking the plants in different environments. And so there's this geographic mosaic hypothesis that probably you haven't come across, but you may have come across the Ehrlich and Raven coevolutionary arms races hypothesis in beginning biology. And this is a very simple one that if you had a plant comes up with a special kind of defense that makes it, it's like a silver bullet, nothing can eat it. That plant's going to spread it's going to reproduce a lot, it's going to spread throughout the environment, it's going to colonize new environments. It may start speciating because its population size or something. But then one day, there's a mutation, and the herbivore figures out how to eat that plant, even though the magic bullet, right? Because toxins become spices for humans, right? Like, how many people like spicy food? We all have adaptations to do it. There was a time in evolutionary history of animals where the animal tried to eat a plant that had that spice, and they'd say, this is giving me such terrible indigestion, I'm never eating that plant again. But, some mammal sometime figured out that this is actually pretty good and probably, helps your parasite load or something like that. So we now cultivate plants for spicy food. So the idea is that if herbivores can circumvent that defense, then they're going to attack those plants, and they're going to reduce the population sizes, and they're going to start winning the battle. And then those plants are they'll have higher and higher extinction rates, and then that produces a selection pressure for the plants to come up with a new defense, and that this happens again and again. And this is called evolutionary arms race, and it was put out by a couple of Stanford professors in Stanford. All right, and the idea is that, back to the white sand and clay environment, is that what if, these different forest types, I told you they had different birds, they have different plants, they could have different insect herbivores, right? And if you have different species of insect herbivores living in the different environments, they should be selecting for different kinds of defenses in the plants that are living there, right? If you're a plant and you're getting attacked by beetles and butterflies, and another plant's getting attacked by phloem suckers and cicadas or something like that, you can imagine that different defenses might be favored. So the idea is that if you have different herbivores in different habitats, they're going to derive different selection pressures, and that's going to be non-mutually exclusive, a different hypothesis why you might have different plants in the different environments. And so, you could phrase this the same way, is that this trade-off is that the intensity of interactions are different because, as I was saying, the impact of herbivores is higher in white sand versus clay environments, but also the diversity of interactions would be different. So the predictions are, for these two different hypotheses, is that you might find differences in the quantity of defense and differences in the qualitative defenses, the kinds of defenses that plants have might be different in different